Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
I'm still tripping, and I know that that Senator Feinstein rightfully asked to put this in writing, and I see, Dr. Sabat, you can barely contain yourself with your finger on the microphone. What is the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 in your mind?
Well, it's actually a very technical difference and a very minor difference, and it's not going to make the difference for research. I'll tell you why. Because, first of all, Schedule 2...
Hold on, stop. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you a lot because I have little time.
Right.
Dr. Ingram just said it makes a big difference. His ability to access Schedule 2 drugs. Dr. Ingram, is that true? Difference in being able to access Schedule 2 drugs for research versus Schedule 1?
Well, we already have Schedule 2.
Right.
You know, we're already
It's easier to get, easier to
we
access.
have it as part of our practice.
Right. So with that, I've heard testimony from a doctor, a researcher, that says Schedule 2 is easier to access.
Here's the thing. Schedule 2 is absolutely easier to research, but the issue is it doesn't solve the problem that you want of getting the drugs to folks now.
Already concentrated on that.
And it does not allow you to prescribe it. Right now, we have a Schedule 1 drug that is the date rape drug, Rohypnol, GHB. We have a Schedule 4 that is exactly that Schedule 1 called Xyrem that's used for narcolepsy. There are ways where marijuana does not meet the definition of Schedule 2, and you can create those products, and we should do that.
Clearly, Schedule 2 is easier to access. Clearly, you can do research on it. Clearly, you have drug companies, as Senator Gillibrand just said.
It's a small difference.
Well, then why are you resisting that difference then?
Because we should spend our time doing things that are going to help families now and help researchers now, which are the things that I mentioned about multiple sites.
So you're saying to me, sir, stop.
And it's a red herring by the legalization movement. Who wrote the CARES Act?
Excuse me. Clearly, it's optics that you're concerned with. Clearly, this makes a difference, and you're saying this, and you can put your rest of your answers in writing, but clearly, the downside of this, the danger of this, is not that families will be hurt. You're just saying that they will not be helped enough. And so we have not just CBD, as you just admitted, it's an entire marijuana plant that has a lot of other aspects that could potentially be helpful. That right now we have a choke point on the source, and the researchers unable to get it. And a schedule change may not have the grand difference that people want, but it has a difference in the ability for research to being done. Now, the Senator Gillibrand went through the different diseases and the different challenges we have from our military veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, from people with cancers and glaucomas and other challenges who can't even get to the point of being in trials, not just for CBD, but for other elements as well. And so, just one more time, Dr. Ingram, you're telling me that you agree that their medical value does exist in the overall study of this plant and its ability to help sick Americans.
Of course. We already use Marinol in our cancer patients every day. I mean, and if we removed plant-based abusive potentials from the market, then you're talking about removing a lot of our current prescription medications. The key for us is we have Americans who are using this already every day in a geographically segregated way, some with tremendous success, and we want to understand that because we want to make that widespread. We want to make it safe, and we want to make it widespread.
And you're a researcher who is doing research right now on Schedule 2 drugs.
I prescribe Schedule 2 drugs every day.
Right, and so the idea that a Schedule 1 drug has no medical application whatsoever, while you're telling me in your testimony that there are potential medical applications, clearly shows that this does not qualify for what a Schedule 1 drug says it is.
Thank you, and let me yield now to Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate this, and I've found the conversation here to be very useful, and I think you're highlighting the wide range of issues that are on people's minds. I hope there's an opportunity to continue it. Mr. Botticelli, how many marijuana overdose deaths were there in the most recent year you have available?
To my knowledge, I don't know if there have been instances of specific overdose-related
deaths. You talked about marijuana deaths, and so I want to be clear. I'm trying to trap you.
No.
How many marijuana deaths have there been in the last 5 years?
So if you're referring to overdoses, I am not sure of those numbers. If you're referring to fatalities,
then I would like to have you supply us with how many overdose deaths there were, because I have heard from experts whose judgment I respect that they don't know of any. So that would be really important for you to provide, at least to me, if not to the committee. What is more dangerous and addictive, methamphetamines and cocaine or marijuana?
So, I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that there's relative toxicity related to those drugs.
What I asked,
but I'm afraid,
what's more dangerous and what is more addictive? Cocaine and meth or marijuana? Pretty simple.
I think that conversation minimizes the harm.
No, I'm not trying to minimize the harm. I want to know which is more dangerous and addictive.
Again, I go back as as a public health person. One of the things that we look at is not what's the relative risk of one drug.
Okay. Let me just say that I think that your equivocation right there, being unable to answer something clearly and definitively when there is unquestioned evidence to the contrary, is why young people don't believe the propaganda, why they think it's benign. If a professional like you cannot answer clearly that meth is more dangerous than marijuana, which every kid on the street knows, which every parent knows, if you can't answer that, maybe that's why we're failing to educate people about the dangers. I don't want kids smoking marijuana. I agree with the chairman. But if the deputy director of the Office of Drug Policy can't answer that question, how do you expect high school kids to take you seriously?
So, Representative, I didn't mean to be disrespectful, and I didn't mean to indicate that there is not different degrees of toxicity associated with different drugs.
I asked what was more dangerous. You couldn't answer it.
No.
And I just want to say that you, sir, represent what's part of the problem. Let me go a little further.
So, sorry, that's exactly not what I'm saying.
What kills more people, tobacco or marijuana?
There's been a fair amount of tobacco-associated deaths. My challenge, and the reason I'm hesitating about answering the questions as it relates to relative risk, is I think many times that conversation gets distorted, that there is no risk, that there's...
I'm not trying to trap you.
No. But this is why, Representative, I don't want to be disrespectful.
Let me suggest that your inability to answer me whether tobacco or marijuana is more dangerous, again, is part of the problem. Mr. Connolly documented very clearly that we have been able to drop dramatically tobacco use. And it kills more people than marijuana, if you don't know that. But we've been able to drop that without locking people up, without arresting. I think this administration has seen 3 to 4 million people arrested for marijuana since it's been in office. And yet we've been able to drop tobacco use without being coercive. We've been using fact-based advertising, and we've focused our efforts on things that matter rather than things that don't work. And I'd respectfully suggest that you and the department take a step back if you're concerned that somehow people think marijuana is benign. That part of the reason is that drug professionals can't communicate in ways that the rest of America does. I appreciate your being here, and I welcome any written follow-up to my questions. Because I'm not trying to trap you, but I'm very discouraged by your inability to answer questions.
So let me tell you, this morning, I spent the bulk of my morning with a number of parents from across the country who are doing everything they can do to prevent drug use, and particularly prescription drug use, and many of them whose kids have died of an overdose. And I asked them, what more can the federal government be doing in terms of preventing substance use and preventing the tragedies? And they told me they cannot understand why states are moving to medical marijuana and legal medical marijuana. They cannot understand it because they understand from a very acute level the message that legalization sends them. And these are, so this is not from a bureaucrat in Washington. These are from parents who struggle on a daily basis and have been devastated by addiction in their kids. And they understand in a very dramatic and real way that legalizing marijuana sends the absolute wrong message to our youth.
Mr. Botticelli, your hands are tied on Schedule 1, but it is ludicrous, absurd, crazy to have marijuana in the same level as heroin. Ask the late Philip Seymour Hoffman if you could. Nobody dies from marijuana. People die from heroin. And every second that we spend in this country trying to enforce marijuana laws is a second that we're not enforcing heroin laws. And heroin and meth are the two drugs that are ravaging our country. And every death, including Mr. Hoffman's, is partly the responsibility of the federal government's drug priorities for not putting total emphasis on the drugs that kill, that cause people to be addicted and have to steal to support their habit. And heroin and meth is where all of your priorities should be. And it's not just Mr. Hoffman, a brilliant actor at 46 years of age, who first went to prescription drugs and then came back to heroin. That's our two major issues, I guess. I had a young friend, son of a girl I dated, who died of a heroin overdose about 2 years ago. I went to a party in Memphis recently, not Vermont, where the governor spent his entire State of the State hour address talking about the ravages of heroin in his state, but Memphis, Tennessee, where 4 women, give or take my age, well, maybe 15 years younger, sometimes I lose perspective, talked about heroin being a great problem among their children and in the Memphis community, and about another young man who had died of heroin. Heroin is getting into the arms of young people. And when we put marijuana on the same level as heroin and LSD and meth and crack and cocaine, we are telling young people not to listen to the adults about the ravages and the problems, and they don't listen because they know you're wrong. Because as Mr. Micah said, we know a lot of young people smoke marijuana. They shouldn't. Young people should be being young people. The most precious commodity in the world is time. Young people have got lots of time. Mr. Mike and I don't have that much more time. That's just the realities. And when you're young, enjoy being young, playing ball, taking it easy, just doing kids things and learning. And you shouldn't be doing drugs, but they are. And we need to make sure that we keep them alive. We need to educate them. But our efforts ought to be toward meth and heroin. That's where effort should be. And it shouldn't be Schedule 1. Anybody that goes to jail for marijuana is a crime when people for possession are taking their liberties away. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. It's a crime committed by our government. There is a cultural lag in this country, and this Congress is a leader in it. With all due respect, you should be listening to scientists. I understand the parents who are grieved because their child died of an overdose. They didn't overdose on marijuana. And you're listening to them rather than the scientists? Mr. Botticelli, it may go back to A Few Good Men, the movie, Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. The truth is the drug war failed. Your direction on marijuana is a failure. Get to dealing and saving kids from heroin overdoses. My young 22-year-old friend died of a heroin overdose. Yeah, he smoked marijuana, probably the first thing he did. But that's not why he smoked heroin or shot it up. Maybe he did it because he heard people like you saying they're all bad and they're all terrible and you can't deal with the truth. and tell them, well, maybe marijuana doesn't kill you. Heroin does and meth does. They're different. And until you deal with the truth, the kids aren't going to believe you at all. Now, you talked about alcohol, and you may have gotten to this. Cirrhosis of the liver, pretty serious thing. Violence against spouses and women. People don't smoke marijuana and beat up their wives and girlfriends. They get drunk. Sometimes they beat up their wives and girlfriends. And I know you've got your statistics. I would debate your statistics. And if you get into your statistics about the amount of people who had marijuana in their system who were arrested or had fatal accidents, I would submit they probably had other drugs in their system, like cocaine or crack in addition to the marijuana, or they had alcohol and marijuana wasn't the cause. Because what I've understand is people who smoke marijuana, mostly they drive slower and they look out for the cops. They don't drive fast and wild like people do on alcohol and cause deaths. Maybe the reason there's so many more people smoking marijuana now is because they're not listening. And maybe they're doing the other drugs too. But it also shows that the drug war has been a failure. It's been a serious failure. Harry Anslinger started. You know who Harry Anslinger is, don't you?
I do not, unfortunately.
You never? Well, you should, because he's your great-grandfather. He started this war in the 30s, and he was tuned out too. And he did it to get the American public had problems, which sometimes I think we still got them, with Hispanics and Mexicans coming into this country. And it was a war on Hispanics and African Americans. And that's when they made marijuana illegal, was in the 30s. And it was all directed at those people. And Latinos are just as much discriminated against as African Americans in disparate arrests. It still continues to this day. It's 85 years since Anslinger started this. And it's the fact that we spent so much time arresting people is sinful. You talked about the overall effects of marijuana. Again, you can't name one person who's died from an overdose of marijuana, can you?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Right. And you say the cumulative effects. Do you know people, possibly, or heard of people who smoke marijuana who are corporate giants, run banks, run major corporations? Do you know about these people?
Yes, sir, but I also know equal number of people. I know a substantial number of people who also have gone on to develop significant disorders who have smoked marijuana. Again, 1 in 9 people who try marijuana develop a dependency, and we know that particularly those kids who use it earlier in their
Kids shouldn't use it. Kids shouldn't use it ever. And at age 18, people shouldn't be arrested for it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it should be 21. But kids shouldn't use it. That's something we all agree on. But the fact is, we need to put our priorities toward heroin and meth. What percentage of your budget goes towards heroin addiction?
So I don't think we necessarily slice our budget, our demand reduction budget, based on drugs. Again, our prevention efforts are focused on preventing drug use.
Isn't that a mistake when people die from heroin in great numbers that the Vermont governor spends his entire state of the state on heroin use? And we don't distinguish and try to save people's lives? That's when you knock people over at the corner store. It's not to get money to buy a donut because you're high. It's to buy heroin because you're hooked. Mm-hmm. That causes people to die. What percentage of your budget goes towards heroin addiction?
So I don't think we necessarily slice our budget, our demand reduction budget, based on drugs. Again, our prevention efforts are focused on preventing drug use.
Isn't that a mistake when people die from heroin in great numbers that the Vermont governor spends his entire state of the state on heroin use? And we don't distinguish and try to save people's lives? That's when you knock people over at the corner store. It's not to get money to buy a donut because you're high. It's to buy heroin because you're hooked. Mm-hmm. That causes people to die.
Our office in 2011, I think, acknowledged the burgeoning prescription drug and opiate epidemic that we have in the United States. In 2011, we released a plan that looks at dealing with the prescription drug abuse and opiate issues.
Let me ask you, my time's about to run out, and it may have. Let me ask you one thing. I corresponded back in 2011 with I guess your predecessor, Kirliowski?
Kurlikowski. He is actually the current director now.
Is he? He said back then that that there was no particular, they haven't found any medical use. To date, however, the FDA and the Institute of Medicine have not found smoked marijuana to be a safe or effective medicine for any condition, nor has any medical association came out in favor of smoked marijuana for widespread medical use. I think that medical associations have, but are you not aware of the fact that people use smoked marijuana to get them through cancer treatment, nausea?
I do, sir, and it's never been our office's position to either to arrest people who've been using medical marijuana. I think it's important for us, and again, unfortunately, that the FDA is not here. You know, that it's the FDA process that ultimately determines the scientific efficacy of a.
But couldn't you try to influence it? Shouldn't that be part of your job? I had a buddy who was a SEAL. He died of pancreatic cancer.
So
when he was he smoked marijuana at the end. His mother said it's the only thing that makes oral smile or eat. So that was pretty good.
So our role in this is to rely on the FDA scientific process to determine. That's our influencing role, is to rely on the science. I would also say, and I find it unfortunate, and I think I would ask the chairman to invite Dr. Nora Volkow, who's the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, because that's where our policy and our science is derived from. We are a science-based office and a policy-based office. And I think if you listen to Dr. Volkow, who is not involved in a political discussion around substance use and marijuana, she will lay out for you the scientific evidence that.
Well, let me ask you this. You are prohibited by law from using any funds to study marijuana legalization for medicinal purposes or any other reason. You're the only office in the federal government that's restricted in that way, and you're required to oppose any scheduling of Schedule I substances, rescheduling like marijuana, that have been approved for medical purposes. Aren't you troubled by these constraints, and don't you think that your expertise should be allowed to be used and study science and contribute to a positive classification of drugs?
So I'm not familiar. Congress put that language in our reauthorization, and I'm actually not, I don't know the background of that.
Would you support legislation to allow you to participate and to voice your opinion and to use science as a basis for your determination?
Well, what I would do is support that federal agencies have the ability to do that. So
yours is prohibited by law. Should that restriction not be lifted?
Again, I think we'd have to have subsequent conversation in terms of.
You mean you think you should be muzzled?
I think that it's important that our office not involve itself in terms of given legislation or given activities. And I believe that that was the genesis for that language, that the office not involve itself in state.
But the totality of the drug world, you need to participate. And if you realize that medical marijuana, as 20 states have found, can help people with cancer, with nausea, with those maybe glaucoma. I mean, Montel Williams apparently has some benefits from it. Lots of people do. That you should be able to participate and set our drug policy straight. Mm-hmm. Your job should be to have a sane drug policy, not to be muzzled and handcuffed.
Yeah. From again, my standpoint, and I'm happy to engage in fuller conversation, is that that has not handcuffed other offices and other federal agencies who are tasked with that work from investigating.
In 1971, Congress created a commission that was headed by Governor Schaefer of Pennsylvania to study federal marijuana policy. That commission came out in favor of decriminalization, but it wasn't put in place. That was 1971. Would you support a new commission to study federal marijuana policy?
So I haven't seen that legislation. I'd be happy to have further conversation.
Would you? It's a concept.
Again, I think we'd be happy to have a conversation in terms of what that might look like.
Thank you, sir, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, Director Baum, in case my mom is watching, I want to be really clear. I'm not advocating for the legalization of marijuana. I will be very, very clear about that. However, I don't understand why it's a Schedule I. It's certainly not treated as a inherently dangerous substance for which there is no medicinal value. It takes a tractor trailer full of marijuana to even trigger a mandatory minimum under our drug laws. So is there any appetite for researching whether or not it should remain a Schedule I drug?
Congressman, the administration doesn't have a position on that, but I'm happy to dialogue with your office. And let me just briefly say that we strongly support research on medical use of marijuana. And if there are obstacles that we see that prevent good research, we want to address those obstacles. Because if there are component elements of marijuana that could be put through the FDA process and turned into medicines that could help people in this country, we want to do that. So we do think there's some potential, and we support research on the subject.
Well, just so everyone's clear, methamphetamine is scheduled what?
I believe it's scheduled
2. Cocaine is scheduled what?
Also 2.
Cocaine base is scheduled what? 2. So it is scheduled lower than marijuana. And again, you can schedule something and still not have it scheduled as a 1. And I would encourage the powers that be, whoever you need to consult with in the administration, to at least explore whether or not it's scheduled correctly without being perceived as advocating for legalization.
Understood.
With that, Mr. Connolly, I will give you a chance to, I'm reluctant to say whatever you want, but I'm going to give you a chance to, to conclude.
I thank my friend, and I actually want to follow up, if I may, on what you just asked. So the point being made here in some ways, Mr. Baum, is if you, not you personally, if the government, federal government, on this subject, marijuana, and how dangerous it is, has no credibility because of the lack of serious empirical work, it threatens our whole drug policy's credibility. And you're seeing this happen in marijuana in the states. They're making decisions. Ms. Norton talked about 8 states, but there are over 25 states that have in some fashion, including my home state of Virginia, liberalized their laws for medical reasons all the way to recreational reasons. I think you'd have to confess to the chairman's point, there was no empirical evidence to justify putting marijuana 50 years ago as a Schedule I drug. Who did that empirical evidence?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Who did what? Who made it scheduled?
There was no, I am asserting, and you can feel free to try to contradict, there was in fact no empirical evidence to justify putting marijuana ahead of the drugs the chairman just listed as a Schedule I drug 50 years ago. And I would, you brought up the need to have empirical research before we start rushing pell-mell to approve it for medical purposes, and I agree with you. But here's the problem. As I said in my opening statement, only one federal entity, NIDA, controls marijuana for legal purposes for experimentation, testing, and the like, research. And NIDA's mission is all about proving the harms of something. They've a priori determined the outcome of research. Nobody thinks NIDA is an objective, neutral place to go to look at the good, the bad, and the indifferent about marijuana. It doesn't have that credibility. So if we're going to do what you suggest, we need to have a different entity with credibility where we're looking at objective evidence and science. And then we can determine, well, where does marijuana work? Mr. Humphreys made the point that there's a more lethal or stronger, more fortified versions of marijuana coming out that concern us. But we put a lot of people in jail, and we've treated this like it's more dangerous than cocaine and the other substances the chairman's, and it's had huge consequences based on very little scientific evidence. I'm not arguing for the legalization either. I agree with my friend from South Carolina. I'm not going there. But neither can I justify the current policy of treating it as the world's most dangerous drug with its classification. You can feel free to respond, and I'm done.
Congressman, I understand the point that you're making. I would love to go with you in your district to talk to police chiefs and sheriffs. I think in reality on the street, police, sheriffs, they don't treat marijuana the way they treat heroin and fentanyl. So I think in practice, there is a prioritization of the most deadly drug threats.
I actually think that's his point, is that law enforcement doesn't, our sentencing scheme does not. Methamphetamine and marijuana are not treated the same from a sentencing standpoint, but yet marijuana is considered to be inherently dangerous with no medicinal value, therefore a Schedule I. And it would just be helpful, again, to Mr. Connolly's point, for us to have some consistency, or at least be able to explain why certain drugs are Scheduled I and others are not. And we can save that for another day. And again, that's coming from two people that are not advocating for the legalization, just for some common sense in how it's scheduled. On behalf of all the members, I want to thank all of our witnesses for your expertise.
I want to tell you about a pair of epiphanies that I had in 1996. The first happened in March of 1996, when I was diagnosed with both AIDS and cancer. I tell you this early on because I want your sympathy throughout the rest of this speech. Later so the nausea that was treated, that was caused by these things, ended instantly with marijuana. With one puff of marijuana, well, and it is astonishing how well it works. And you have to understand how serious it is when you can't keep your medication down. It's not just that it's uncomfortable. If you can't keep that medication down, it's not going to save your life. And that is the important point. We're talking about life and death here when we're talking about treating AIDS and cancer. 20% of the people who are not taking the combination therapy, which is working so well for those who can tolerate it. I am one of them. But for those who cannot tolerate it, 20% stop because of nausea. I wonder how many of those 20%, if they had access, readily available, inexpensive medical marijuana, if indeed they would have that same problem. Every day, people are denied cancer chemotherapy because the doctors stop, knowing that they will die of malnutrition if they go another day without eating. Nausea is an unsolved problem of medicine, and marijuana is the finest anti-nausea medication known to science. At the same time, our leaders have lied about this consistently. Our leaders whom we trust, whom we look up to, from the Democratic president to the who knows what he is, drug czar, to the Republican leaders in Congress in both the House and the Senate. They have lied to us about medical marijuana. They have lied to us about the harm of marijuana. There is no more benign medicinal substance known to human beings. And we have been lied about this. And so this was my first epiphany, was over here, watching my normal run to the bathroom with one puff of marijuana turn into a meandering raid on the kitchen. And so the one epiphany was over here, and I said, I am not going to rest until medical marijuana is available to every sick person who needs it in the United States. I would like to suggest to you that you, not necessarily as a party, but you individually, maybe not as a party plank, but more as a pet project, kind of a little chia pet project, to actively work for medical marijuana in this country. I believe medical marijuana currently stands for the most hideous ongoing example of government interference in the private lives of individuals. This medical marijuana prohibition is an outrage within an outrage within an outrage. The first outrage, of course, is the war on drugs itself. Prohibition does not work, has not worked, cannot work, and anyone who says it can is either deeply delusional or is making money on the drug war. The next layer down is, of course, marijuana prohibition. This is a plant that has never hurt anyone in 5,000 years. And in a country where 400,000 people die prematurely of cigarettes, and 100,000 people die prematurely from alcohol, that this herb, this plant, this weed, should be so illegal in this country that since the 1995 Omnibus Crime Bill, if you possess enough of it, our government will put you to death. If you don't think marijuana is still prohibited, keep in mind that 640,000 people were arrested in 1996 alone, the most ever, while we have a Speaker of the House and a President and a Vice President who have all admitted to smoking marijuana. That's one arrest every 48 seconds. These are pothead baby boomers, and it's an outrage that they should put their fellows in prison. Finally, the outrage within the outrage within the outrage is medical marijuana. In the war on drugs, unlike any war in American history, unlike any modern civilized war of the past 2 centuries, in this war on drugs, they are not stopping the battle and allowing the Red Cross on the field. In fact, they are shooting directly at the sick and at those who are trying to help them, and they are shooting to kill. A friend of mine, Todd McCormick, was arrested for growing marijuana in his own home after the Proposition 215 passed in California permitting him cultivation. He had cancer 9 times before he was 10. The DEA came in, destroyed his plants, and wants to put him in prison for the rest of his life, a 10-year mandatory minimum, plus a $4 million fine. That's shooting to kill. It's been going on for 11 months now. As many of you know, I've been investigated now for 11 months by the DEA and their bosom buddy, the IRS. The DEA and the IRS came into my home. They took away my computer containing a book on medical marijuana and a book critical of the DEA, which very quickly became 3 books critical of the DEA. Don't tread on this faggot. Unlike any other issue currently in the political play, public opinion polls are outrageously in favor of medical marijuana, and almost every politician vigorously objects. Public opinion polls show that somewhere between 65 and 90% of the population, but never below 65, favor marijuana under the care of a doctor's supervision. They do that even though all the living presidents and Nancy Reagan said it was a hoax, even though C. Everett Koop came out and said it was a hoax, which really hurt. People still believe that if a doctor says it's okay, and if you're sick, it's okay to take medicine, and we make exceptions when people are sick. That compassion has not been beaten out of the American people. It is still there, and we can appeal to it. And finally, and most briefly, I ask you to support medical marijuana now because it is the right thing to do. I'm tired of people thinking that libertarians don't have morality, that they don't have values. It's a lot of hogwash. Libertarians are the only politicians with values. You know, on C-SPAN, those bars, those great pillars of the Capitol, almost looks like you're standing in front of prison bars. And I look there and I think, that's where the federal government wants me for the rest of my life for taking my medicine. And so I ask you, who are the beacons of liberty in this country, and I ask you in the name of her, that Lady Liberty there, You know, I'm gay, but that woman turns me on. If you're gay, I'm a gay libertarian. I'm one of those laissez fairies. I asked the Libertarian Party to take this healing herb and use it to heal. Yes, you too. We'll be doing it for you, crying in the corner there, that baby. We'll be doing it for you, our children. And I ask you to take that herb, that healing herb, and I ask you to heal the body politic with it. And I ask you, Lady Liberty, to once again lift your shining lamp above the golden door. Hey, lady, got a light? Thank you.
So what is the actual state right now, Dr. Levesque, of medical marijuana here in Oregon?
Well, what's going on right now is that a person who wants to use medical marijuana, in other words, has a disease process, which includes wasting disease of AIDS, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, and some people even use it for various and sundry types of pain problems. And there is virtually, in particular in regard to pain, pain is so subjective that there's no way for somebody to measure the degree of pain or the intensity of pain or even the relief of pain or anything else. There's just no way to do this. But if a person says, I have a bad back or I have a bad this or a bad that, and I'm in pain, and that smoking marijuana helps, I don't think that anybody should deny them the right to use that. Now, what's going on in Oregon at the present time is that people who are using marijuana for medical purposes have to get some sort of a letter from a physician which says marijuana will alleviate the problem, pain, or whatever it might be for this individual. This letter is sent to the Oregon Health Division. Dr. Grant Higginson is the person who is the, I guess, he's not the director of the Oregon Health Division, but he's the number 2 person there. And the number 1 person is not a physician, but he is. So he is the one to whom these letters are addressed, and he is the one who will issue the equivalent of a marijuana user's license. Mm-hmm. Now, the strange thing about it is that it is still a federal offense to, in many respects, about the use of marijuana. So no, at the present time, nobody knows what's going to happen, but this hasn't prevented people who get benefit from the use of marijuana from using it. There are an estimated 100,000 people in the United States right now who admit to using it for medical purposes, and there are probably, as I understand it, around 10 million people, excuse me, who use marijuana recreationally. Now, this is, I think the so-called recreational use of this is a kind of a poor term, because I don't think people smoke tobacco for recreational purposes. I don't know why people smoke tobacco, but whether it's for recreational purposes or whatever it is, this is a sort of a strange terminology that is used.
It's like when they use alcohol, that's social drinking.
or something, right?
Well, I suppose that's true. I've never heard of the social. Well,
recreational use of alcohol.
Yeah, recreational use of alcohol and the social use of marijuana. So the terminology here is very, very obscure or muddied or whatever the right word is.
Imprecise at the least.
Absolutely. Now, I think one of the strangest things about this is that the federal government raises marijuana
Yes.
in Mississippi. The federal government has it harvested and processed to make marijuana cigarettes. And there are 8 people in the United States who have letters of permission from the Drug Enforcement Administration to use marijuana for their medical purposes. Now, if 8 people can use it for medical purposes, for relief of their medical problem, why can't 9 or 10 or 1,000 use it? So it's a very, very strange situation. And a year and a half ago, I was one of 6 doctors who testified at the American Medical Association convention for the American Medical Association to stand behind the rights of patients to use marijuana for medical purposes. And this was passed by the House of Delegates of the American Medical Association in Dallas. The headquarters of the American Medical Association has, I don't know whether the word is they've sat on their hands or sat on their heads or whatever they've done, but they haven't done anything about it. And we 6 doctors have written a letter to the Journal of the American Medical Association as the equivalent of a letter to the editor asking why hasn't the American Medical Association taken a stand on this? Well, the first letter we wrote, they sent back that we're sorry, but we're rejecting it because we have too many other things to print in the magazine or something like that. And then about 6 weeks ago, the American, what is it, the Institute of Medicine?
Institute of Medicine.
The Institute of
National
Medicine.
Academy of Science.
From the National Academy of Science came out, very highly publicized throughout the United States, that there was considerable evidence that marijuana was good for certain medical problems. And the American Medical Association has been strangely quiet about this, but in view of the Institute of Medicine, we 6 doctors again wrote a letter to the American Medical Association and the Journal of the American Medical Association say, the Institute of Medicine says that it has some benefit in medical purposes, and why should people who use it be thrown in jail for using it for medical reasons? So, as somebody pointed out a few minutes ago, we are at the cutting edge of this, and with the vote, I guess the last 2 elections we had for use of medical marijuana?
Yeah, November of '98 here in Oregon.
Yep.
And Washington and
Arizona.
Arizona, they voted on it for
California.
the second time.
Yeah.
They originally voted in 1996 along with California to legalize medical marijuana.
And I think if I understand right, there are 6 states who have passed initiatives. Is that what it is? Or
Yes, 6, and then that's not counting the District of Columbia, where the United States federal Congress has not allowed that vote to be counted. Exit polls showed that it passed with 72%, but an amendment to an appropriations rider by Georgia Representative Bob Barr defunded the counting of that vote and said that the District of Columbia cannot count the vote on medical marijuana that was on their ballot.
Well, so Dr. Beck, I mean, Florida State, is there every day, we find out new information about drugs that have existed for a long time? I mean, it's not like the book is closed, once they come out with the drug in the first place.
Well, I think it's very interesting that we know from historical records that cannabis has been used for literally thousands of years, and nobody has ever reported any bad effects from the use of it.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to tobacco or to alcohol, there's absolutely no comparison between tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana. There's just absolutely none whatsoever. And the statement that that marijuana is a gateway drug to heroin or cocaine or whatever, this was verbally thrashed by the Institute of Medicine that said there was no evidence whatsoever that this was the case. So I think the main thing that we're doing is supporting General McCafferty and a whole bunch of DEA agents who are making very high salaries and don't want to give up the game, as you might say. So the people that are making money on the marijuana issue are the DEA agents and the people who grow and sell marijuana and don't pay any taxes on any aspect of the money that they make. And if they're caught, they get sent to a federal prison where it costs at least $40,000 a year to keep them in prison. So I guess the federal prisons, the guards in the prisons are probably also recipients of a lot of money from the marijuana business. So
exactly.
It's really a strange, absolutely bizarre situation that this has gone on, and I can't understand why some of these politicians in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere can't see this or understand it or whatever the right word is. I don't understand it.
I was just superficially aware of it.
I had no knowledge at all of it, I would say.
I'm interested in medical marijuana.
Tell you what I'm going to do. How about we pass a resolution? That's not a bad solution.
I'm Robert Platshorn, and I'm the founder of the Silver Tour and the man who spent more time in prison for marijuana, a nonviolent offense, than anyone in the history of America. I was in federal prison for 30 years for smuggling marijuana. When I got out of prison, the last thing in the world I expected to do was become an activist.
Tax medical marijuana.
Nobody speaks to seniors. When Prop 19 was defeated in California, I looked at the exit polls and I saw that seniors voted 65% against. That's my generation. We invented marijuana as it's known today. I mean, we were Woodstock. The list is so long of things that can be treated with cannabis. People with arthritis, people who have trouble sleeping, who would like to be able to smoke a joint and go to sleep. There's a medicine that can't do you any harm. No one has ever died from marijuana. The savings to the taxpayer, to the drug user, to the insurance companies is billions upon trillions of dollars.
I learned today that many of my friends who have disabilities and are incapacitated can benefit from medical marijuana.
Please, let me sign a letter to my congressman. I'm old. I can't wait. We need this stuff now. And how come you didn't bring samples?
I'd like to try it. I would really like to. I have many medical problems. I don't like the fact that you have to smoke it. If I could take it in a pill or some other way, chocolate candy.
I have a request from every state in the union to bring the Silver Tour. And when we can find enough sponsors, that's what we're going to be doing. All we really have to do is allay their fears. We don't have to sell medical marijuana. These guys smoked it back then. They know that it's pretty good. And if you can go to bed with a smile, you're so much better off.
I'm
Updated revenue forecasts predict recreational marijuana will bring Oregon more than $142 million in taxes over the next 2 years. But remember, this is an industry that is also very young, so those numbers are bound to change. Lack of data continues to be the main hurdle for those creating the state budget because the federal government still classifies marijuana use as illegal. That means producers are instead listed on tax rolls under groups like miscellaneous farming or even bakeries if they make edible marijuana.
There's not categories specifically designed for cannabis right now, and as a result, you can't just look up cannabis, filter on the data and say this is the number of jobs, this is the number of sales, this is tax revenue.
Economists say that projecting tax revenue could get easier as more states start to share information about selling legal pot.
Here's a K2 medical alert. A new study finds the number of young people who use pot has not gone up since it was legalized. That's according to the Washington State Institute of Public Policy. Recreational marijuana has been legal in Washington State for 3 years now. The report says none of the possible negative impacts have seen much change, including use by youth, treatment admissions, and criminal convictions. But researchers say the analysis should be considered preliminary, as the data just reflects the first 2 years of legal cannabis sales.
Well, that's the way it is this week. Next week we'll have a tape show, and the week after that we'll be back here with Anthony Taylor of Compassionate Oregonians on November 17th to talk about his experience in the legislature and what patients have to do to comply with these new rules and regulations. But we appreciate you watching, and we appreciate Mr. John Cornett standing by in the wings. We appreciate the team of a dozen people that are behind the cameras and in the control rooms that keep this show going, and we appreciate you too, bro, and you too, viewers. Tune in next week, and remember to help us restore him.
Like that.
Right, harvest is here. Everything is so good. Like train wreck, northern lights. We like Shrek too. Sour diesel. Life is good. Life is good. Life is good for you and me, so good, so good, so good, so good. We like train wreck, that's right, northern lights. We like Godboy too. Cheese sometimes. Life is good. Life is good. Can be every day. Life is good for you and me. Yes, so good. So good. So good.